Let's be completely honest for a second. Few things are as unbelievably frustrating as having your entire day derailed just because you can't find accessible parking. For individuals with disabilities, a parking placard isn't just some random piece of plastic hanging from a rearview mirror. It is literally a vital tool for independence and hassle-free access to your own community. But, the anxiety of potentially losing those privileges because you missed a renewal deadline, that is incredibly stressful. So welcome to this explainer. Today, I'm going to give you a crystal clear, step-by-step roadmap to keep those essential parking privileges completely up to date right here in Washington State.
Imagine pulling up to the grocery store, the pharmacy, or even your doctor's office, only to suddenly realize you legally cannot use those accessible parking spaces right by the front door. So, what actually happens when your routine is disrupted by an expired placard? Well, navigating strict bureaucratic hurdles is tough enough on a good day, and people with disabilities already face way too many of them. But hey, don't worry, let's just dive right into this. This explainer has all the answers you need to navigate Washington State's system like a pro, avoid any of those nasty fines, and keep your parking access completely uninterrupted.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with why your placard matters, then identifying your permit type, a step-by-step renewal guide, handling exceptions and expirations, tips for smooth renewals, and we will wrap up with a final recap and disclaimer. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Why Your Placard Matters.
Before we get into the how, we really need to understand the why. Navigating busy environments in Washington, whether that's the bustling streets of downtown Seattle or just a quiet local hub, absolutely requires reliable access. The state relies on a very strict statutory framework, specifically Chapter 46.19 of the Revised Code of Washington. And why is it so strict? To ensure that these highly coveted parking spaces remain available for the people who genuinely need them while aggressively cracking down on fraud. It's a really delicate balance between ensuring public accessibility and preventing misuse, which is exactly why the renewal rules and clinical verifications are as tight as they are.
Moving right along to Section 2, Identifying your permit type. Okay, before you take any action, we have to figure out exactly what situation you're in. There is a huge difference between the two main placards in Washington. First, we have the red temporary placard. This one is for transient conditions that are expected to improve within about 12 months. And here is the crucial point. You cannot actually renew a temporary placard. Nope. Once it expires, you have to submit a completely new application. Now, on the other hand, we have the blue permanent placard. This bad boy is valid for 5 years. But keep in mind, even though it's called permanent, the state still mandates a formal renewal every 5 years through a medical recertification, just to make sure your credentials are still valid and up to date.
All right, here we go. Section 3, our step-by-step renewal guide. But first, I really want to highlight a fascinating shift in Washington policy when it comes to eligibility. Historically, we've kind of thought of disabled parking purely in physical or biomechanical terms, right? Like using a wheelchair. But Washington now formally recognizes neurodevelopmental conditions like autism spectrum disorder right under the umbrella of neurological conditions. This means that if cognitive or behavioral conditions, like elopement behavior, create a functional safety impairment that restricts safe walking, you qualify. It's an absolutely incredible step toward broader, more inclusive accessibility. Okay, so here is your actual game plan for renewing a permanent placard. Step 1. About 45 days before your placard expires, the Department of Licensing is going to mail you a renewal notice, so definitely keep an eye out for that. Step 2. You've got to take this notice to an authorized healthcare practitioner for clinical recertification. And Step 3. Submit the completed paperwork in person or by mail. Did you catch what's missing there? Yeah, there is no online processing option for permanent renewals. Ironically enough, you can process the temporary red placards online, but for the permanent blue ones, you got to rely on the mail or an in-person visit.
When you're looking at the application, this is the clinical verification portion. Your healthcare provider has to fill this out to explicitly certify your mobility limitations. And it's not just a casual signature. They are literally declaring under penalty of perjury that you meet the state's very stringent medical criteria.
And please, listen, if you only take one single thing away from this entire explainer, let it be this quote directly from the state's guidelines. The Department of Licensing does not accept photocopies of prescriptions. You absolutely must submit a separate, original, physical prescription on office letterhead or secure prescription paper alongside your renewal notice. If you submit a photocopy, your application is going to be delayed or just rejected outright. Do not let a simple copying error disrupt your day-to-day parking privileges. So, you might be wondering, who can actually sign this vital piece of paper? Well, the list is actually broader than you might expect. Yes, you've got your licensed physicians, nurses, and physician assistants, but Washington also authorizes podiatrists, chiropractors, and even naturopaths to sign off. Now, surprisingly, dentists and optometrists are entirely excluded from authorizing these privileges. So just make sure you're booking that recertification appointment with the right kind of practitioner.
That brings us to Section 4, handling exceptions and expirations.
What if you completely miss the deadline? Well, the rule here is incredibly strict. If your permanent placard is already expired, even by just a few days, you cannot use the streamlined renewal process. Your right to use disabled parking literally ends the second that placard expires. You have to submit a completely new application using Form TD 420-073 and get a brand new medical certification starting entirely from scratch. And whatever you do, never park using an expired placard because those fines can hit up to $450. Ouch. Now, what if you're handling this paperwork for someone else? If you're a caregiver renewing for an elderly parent or a dependent minor, you have to submit an extra piece of paper called a Certificate of Fact, which is Form TD 420-043. This basically declares your relationship to the dependent. If the vehicle is managed by a trust, you're going to need a Trust Authority Certificate. And if you run an organization that transports individuals with disabilities, you have to do your renewals in person with a current business license and Form DLE 420-529. It's a bit more red tape, for sure, but it is absolutely necessary to prevent the fraud we talked about earlier.
Section 5. Tips for smooth renewals. Let's make this easy.
Once you finally drop your application in the mail or hand it over in person, you should expect a processing time of about 2 to 4 weeks. But here is a super actionable detail for you. The Department of Licensing will send your new placard, but they are going to separately mail you an Individual with Disabilities Parking Privilege ID card. You have to keep this physical little ID card on your person, like in your wallet or purse, whenever you use the placard. It's required so you can satisfy any verification requests from law enforcement. And here is a pro tip that trips up so many drivers. If you decide to exchange your standard license plates for permanent disabled plates during your renewal, you absolutely must remember to update your good-to-go electronic tolling account with the Washington State Department of Transportation. If you forget to do this, those automated cameras won't recognize your new disabled plates, and you could wind up with some extremely confusing tolling discrepancies and bills in the mail. Nobody wants to deal with that.
Finally, Section 6, our final recap and disclaimer. Let's lock this all in with a quick recap. First, know what you have. Red means you got to start completely over. Blue means a 5-year renewal. Second, when renewing that permanent placard, you must get an original physical prescription. Again, absolutely no photocopies allowed. Third, remember that permanent renewals must be done by mail or in person. Do not waste your time looking for an online portal because it just doesn't exist. And finally, stay proactive. Mark your calendar and never ever park using an expired placard. Keeping your privileges active is really all about staying ahead of the paperwork.
Okay, mandatory disclaimer time. State regulations, forms, and processes absolutely do change over time. You should always double-check the most current guidelines directly with the Washington State Department of Licensing or consult with a legal or healthcare professional to be safe. But I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Navigating state bureaucracy can feel like an incredibly daunting maze, but self-advocacy is your absolute greatest tool. The system works best when you know exactly how to work the system. Stay proactive and don't let a few administrative hurdles stand in the way of your independence. Thanks so much for learning with me today.